Saruman, the leader of the Istari and the head of the White Council, has one of the biggest impacts on the Lord of the Rings and Sauron's rise to power. Without him, Sauron would have had a much harder time facing not only the Fellowship, but the White Council, as it would have stayed as one of the greatest forces of good against Sauron. Saruman's betrayal caused a devastating blow to the Council's strength. But what if Saruman had remained loyal? What if, instead of seeking the One Ring for himself, he had continued to lead the Council in their mission to counter Sauron? In this alternate scenario, the White Council could have been stronger than ever, and its impact on the war against Sauron might have been immeasurable. The White Council is a group of powerful beings in the Lord of the Rings, including wizards like Gandalf and Saruman, as well as elven leaders such as Galadriel and Elrond, formed to counter the growing threat of Sauron. Originally created to watch over Middle-earth and thwart evil, the Council's influence diminishes when Saruman betrays them by secretly seeking the One Ring for himself. Had Saruman remained loyal to his mission and steadfast in the pursuit of good, his role in the White Council would have shifted from one of deceit and subtle sabotage to that of a true leader among the wise. It was Saruman, after all, who was appointed head of the Council, and if he had chosen the path of righteousness, the Council's efforts against Sauron would have been far more unified and aggressive. Saruman, with his deep knowledge of Sauron's ways and the history of the Rings of Power, would have steered the Council into earlier, more decisive action. From the very beginning, Saruman was instrumental in the Council's decision to assault Dol Guldur, Sauron's stronghold in southern Mirkwood. But, as Elrond reveals, Saruman's true intentions were far from pure. It was by the devices of Saruman that we drove him from Dol Guldur, for Saruman had long studied the arts of the enemy himself. If Saruman had not sought the One Ring for himself, his wisdom would have been used to push for a more concerted effort to fully destroy Sauron while he was weak. In an untainted timeline, Saruman would have urged Gandalf, Galadriel, and Elrond to unite their strength in launching a preemptive strike against Sauron, before his influence spread too far. His extensive knowledge of Sauron's dark arts could have provided crucial insights, allowing the Free Peoples to mount a coordinated assault on Mordor long before Sauron's power fully returned. Without the internal schisms caused by Saruman's hidden treachery, the White Council would have presented a far more formidable force. With a more unified council and Saruman's greater insight on Sauron's power, the White Council would have been able to begin gathering strong allies. With Saruman's authority as the White Wizard and as the leader of the White Council, he would have been able to awaken the ancient Ents much earlier, and rather than fighting them, they would have been able to join forces against Sauron. In the original timeline, Saruman's betrayal was painfully felt by the Ents, the ancient tree herders of Fangorn Forest. Treebeard, their leader, once described said, "He has a mind of metal and wheels, and he does not care for growing things, except as far as they serve him for the moment." Had Saruman remained true to his calling, the Ents would have been his allies rather than his enemies. In this alternate timeline, Saruman would have continued to honor the ancient bonds between himself and the natural world. He would have recognized the importance of Fangorn Forest, not only as a powerful force of nature, but also as an essential ally in the war against Sauron. Saruman, rather than exploiting the forest for his own purposes, would have turned to Treebeard and the Ents for counsel and aid, understanding that their strength was crucial in the coming war. When the time came for the Ents to march, it would not have been in anger and vengeance against Saruman, but in unity against Sauron. The destruction of Isengard would never have occurred, and the Ents, led by Treebeard, would have joined the forces of Rohan and Gondor much earlier, bringing their immense power to bear against the armies of Mordor. With Saruman's guidance, the Ents would have become a formidable force for good, and their intervention might have saved countless lives during the War of the Ring. During this time, Saruman would not only seek out allies against Sauron, but would also begin strengthening his own forces in Isengard. Under Saruman's loyal leadership, Isengard transforms into a well-prepared stronghold, fully aligned with the White Council's mission. Saruman opens Isengard to allies, creating a coordinated base where forces from many factions around Middle-earth can gather. Soldiers train under Saruman's guidance, with his wisdom directing tactics that blend martial skill with magical defense, shaping a disciplined army ready to stand against Sauron's forces. Resources flow steadily into Isengard. Craftsmen reinforce the walls and armories guided by Saruman's knowledge of ancient defenses. Isengard becomes equipped not only with weapons, but also with strategic defenses to guard against both physical and magical threats. In this new role, Isengard serves as a critical hub for communication and planning among Middle-earth's forces. Messages travel swiftly through its gates, plans are made, and Saruman's influence shapes a unified front. What was once a tower of personal ambition now stands as a fully committed base of defense, with Isengard's troops and resources ready to face the darkness spreading across the land. Isengard would also extend its influence outward, giving aid to the many regions of Middle-earth such as Gondor and Rivendell. But perhaps most importantly, Rohan, instead of acting against Rohan, Saruman and his powerful forces, would act to prevent Rohan's fall. In Saruman's fall, the people of Rohan were among the first to feel the consequences. His betrayal directly led to the invasion of Rohan by his Uruk-hai and the manipulation of King Theoden through Grima Wormtongue's treachery. Had Saruman remained good, however, Rohan's fate would have been vastly different. Theoden, who once languished under Saruman's influence, described Saruman as a traitor who knows no shame. If Saruman had stayed true to his calling, Rohan would have had one of its most powerful allies in the form of Saruman and the might of Isengard. Rather than plotting to weaken the kingdom from within, Saruman would have worked to strengthen Rohan's defenses, recognizing the Horse Lords as vital allies in the coming war against Sauron. As Theoden once said, "The treacherous are ever distrustful, but you, Lord Saruman, long ago I deemed you the wisest of the wise. You had the power to unite all peoples against the enemy. But instead of this, you have chosen to wither into a petty tyrant." Instead of the brutal assault on Helm's Deep, where the last march of the Ents was required to destroy Saruman's forces, Rohan's people would have fought only against Sauron's encroaching armies. Saruman's considerable strategic acumen would have bolstered Rohan's strength, fortifying the Riddermark's defenses and preparing them to face Mordor's inevitable onslaught. The vast resources of Isengard, rather than being spent on the creation of Uruk-hai and war machines, would have been dedicated to helping Rohan raise fortifications, train soldiers, and develop strategies to resist Sauron's might. This unity between Rohan, the Ents, and other factions of Middle-earth wouldn't just stop at the realms of men, but continue to spread to the other races of Middle-earth as well. The first of these he would most likely reach out to is the elves. Saruman, as a steadfast ally to both Elrond and Galadriel, shared his place alongside them within the White Council. This would allow for effortless alliances with both the realm of Rivendell and Lothlorien. Saruman would have been able to provide these leaders and their realms with critical knowledge of the One Ring, and Sauron giving the elves a powerful upper hand against Sauron. Using his powerful skills in persuasion, Saruman would have also most likely been able to convince the elves of these nations to coordinate more openly in offensive attacks against Sauron with the free peoples of Middle-earth, such as during the final battle of Mordor. In a similar vein, Saruman, using his reputation and persuasive abilities, could encourage Thranduil, the leader of the elven realm of Mirkwood, to ally closely with the Council and the other realms. To do this, Saruman most likely would have aided them against Dol Guldur, using his powerful abilities against the dark arts, and perhaps showcasing his powerful united forces. Saruman, after convincing Mirkwood, would most likely continue building alliances and make his way to the Grey Havens. The Grey Havens, under the guidance of Círdan the Shipwright, are traditionally a place of departure rather than conflict. However, Saruman could inspire Círdan to fortify the Havens against any potential incursions from Sauron's forces, especially as the threat of invasion rises. His guidance would ensure the Havens remain a safe point of retreat and a last resort for escape, reinforcing the coastal defenses with strategic sea-based defenses or fortified watchtowers. These alliances would bring the elves and men together unlike anything since perhaps the First Age, when they gathered together against Morgoth. But he wouldn't stop there. Saruman would then make his way to the Dwarven kingdoms. Many of the Dwarven kingdoms during this time were scattered and fractured. Perhaps the most prominent lasting realm would be Erebor, or the Kingdom Under the Mountain. The dwarves of Erebor, led by Dain Ironfoot, had recently reclaimed their kingdom after the events of The Hobbit. Erebor was once again prosperous, and its people had formed a trading alliance with Dale, the nearby kingdom of men. While Erebor itself was strong, the dwarves were somewhat isolated from the rest of Middle-earth's conflicts, focused on their own defenses and prosperity. Saruman would most likely be able to convince Erebor to join in unity with the White Council and the rest of Saruman's allies, shown by the fact that Erebor already has trade relations with the Kingdom of Dale. This would finally bring unity for all the three races of elves, dwarves, and men. If Saruman had not already, he also would go to Dale and try to gain their alliance as well, which, if successful, would bring another powerful ally to his alliance. After Erebor, Saruman would be left with a tough choice as to whether or not to seek out the further and more fractured realms of the dwarves. If he decides to do so, he might lose out on precious time, but Saruman would most likely be successful in recruiting the dwarves of the Iron Hills and the dwarves of the Blue Mountains. Among hinted settlements in the east, though those would be far and even more time-consuming than the others. Regardless of his decision, the alliance with Erebor would bring a strong ally to his forces against Sauron and would start the great alliance between the three races. With Saruman as a unifying force, the alliance of elves, dwarves, and men could have been an incredibly powerful alliance, unlike anything Middle-earth has seen since perhaps the First Era. This coalition would have fought Sauron much more head-on. With the coordination of all the realms and the sharing of resources, each realm would have been much stronger. The dwarves could contribute their exceptional blacksmithing skills, creating strong weapons and armor. The elves would offer their knowledge and ancient artifacts, enhancing the alliance's capabilities. Meanwhile, the men would provide strong leadership. Together, they would form a much more powerful force. Saruman would continue to coordinate with his cunning and knowledge of Sauron. He would be able to prevent any major victories from Sauron. He would also be able to coordinate Gandalf among the other notable figures. He would likely assist Gandalf in destroying the ring much faster. While Gandalf might not have taken as large of a role if Saruman had remained good, it's very likely he still would have been one of the main figures in retrieving and destroying the One Ring. Likely, under the guidance of Saruman, he would have gone to the Shire and meet Frodo and gotten the One Ring. During this time, Gandalf still believed Saruman was good, so not much would have changed. Frodo likely would have still joined him, and the Fellowship likely still would have formed. However, it's very possible Saruman would have offered more guidance for the Fellowship, and with his new alliances would have not only supported Gandalf's position in destroying the ring, but also helped it. He would have been able to give the Fellowship information about the One Ring and Sauron that would likely prove vital in the coming journey. It's also very likely that Saruman would have been able to gather more allies to go with the party. Perhaps figures we already know, like Éomer or Galdor, or perhaps it would be new heroes that Saruman found. For this hypothetical, Gandalf would not have been afraid to pass the Gap of Rohan, as before he avoided it due to Saruman. It's still possible Gandalf went through Moria, in which case the same encounter with the Balrog likely would have happened. It's impossible to say exactly how it would go with the new Fellowship, but it is possible Gandalf ends up surviving the battle. Gandalf surviving could both be a good thing or a bad thing for the Free People. Gandalf would have been able to hold the Fellowship together longer if he did not fall. And as a result, Boromir, if still with the Fellowship, likely would have survived. This could have resulted in the ring being destroyed easier, but this would have prevented. However, if Gandalf survived, then he would not be able to return as Gandalf the White. This could lead to some negative consequences for the Fellowship. Still, with Saruman on their side, the situation likely would not have been too dire. It's very likely from here Frodo would still have split from the rest of the Fellowship with Sam and had a similar trek to Mordor, which would have resulted in the destruction of the ring and Sauron's defeat. With Saruman on the side of good, the War of the Ring would have been far less desperate for the Free Peoples. Saruman's strategic mind, combined with his vast knowledge of Sauron's tactics and the Rings of Power, would have allowed the Free Peoples to anticipate many of Sauron's moves. The Battle of Minas Tirith, which was nearly lost, might have been avoided entirely with Saruman's guidance. Saruman, understanding the importance of Gondor as the last stronghold of men, would have ensured that the realm was better prepared for Sauron's assault. He would have counseled Denethor, the steward of Gondor, providing him with the wisdom and guidance he so desperately needed. Denethor's descent into madness, fueled by the Palantir and his despair over the war, might have been prevented if Saruman had been there to offer counsel. As mentioned by Gandalf, Denethor is not as other men of this time, Pippin. Proud and subtle, a man of far greater lineage and power, though he is not called a king. But he will not yield. In the final confrontation with Sauron, Saruman would have been a vital asset. His deep understanding of the Dark Lord's mind and his knowledge of the ancient arts would have allowed him to predict Sauron's moves and counter them effectively. The battle for Middle-earth would have been fought not only with swords and armies, but with the strategic brilliance of Saruman, who would have guided the Free Peoples to a much cleaner victory. With Saruman, it might have been possible to even defeat the entire forces of Mordor without Frodo destroying the ring himself. Though Frodos's journey still would have saved many lives. But in the end, Saruman would have saved many and would have been remembered as a hero. Saruman's end, as it happened in the original timeline, was one of tragedy and ruin. After betraying his mission, he was reduced to a petty tyrant in the Shire, eventually being killed by his own servant, Wormtongue. However, had Saruman stayed good, his end would have been one of honor and glory. After the defeat of Sauron, Saruman would have stood as one of the greatest heroes of the War of the Ring, alongside Gandalf, Aragorn, and Frodo. His wisdom and leadership would have been celebrated, and he would have been remembered as the savior of Middle-earth rather than its betrayer. In the end, Saruman might have chosen to sail west to the Undying Lands, returning to Valinor as a Maya who had fulfilled his mission. His Deut Comur would have been one of peace and fulfillment, rather than the bitter exile that he suffered in the original timeline. Saruman's story, instead of ending in disgrace, would have been a testament to the power of wisdom, courage, and steadfastness in the face of temptation. At the end of it all, had Saruman stayed good, the course of Middle-earth's history would have been dramatically changed. His wisdom, leadership, and strategic brilliance would have strengthened the forces of good, uniting the Free Peoples, and preventing many of the tragedies that unfolded during the War of the Ring. Saruman's decision to pursue the One Ring and forsake his original mission ultimately led to his own downfall. But had he remained true, he would have stood as one of Middle-earth's greatest heroes, ensuring victory over Sauron and leaving behind a legacy of hope rather than betrayal. Thanks for watching this video. If you've enjoyed this, be sure to check out our other videos for more Lord of the Rings content. See you on the next one. Namari?